So staying with us on South Africa tonight, while more than 100,000 people have died of COVID-19 in India, it's a country with the second most infections. And even though the spread of the virus is showing no signs of abating, the government is considering opening up the country. So for the latest, we're joined now by Rebecca Bundhun from Mumbai. Rebecca, thanks a lot for joining us this evening. I mean, let's start off with the relatively low coronavirus numbers in the last few days. What do we attribute this to?
Yes, that's right. So India has now passed that grim milestone of more than 100,000 deaths. And it's only the third country after Brazil and the United States to exceed that number of 100,000 deaths. And it's the second worst affected country in terms of total confirmed coronavirus infections, with now more than 6.4 million confirmed cases after the United States. But cases have actually come down if we look at the official numbers in terms of new daily infections being added. Today, for example, they were just over 79,400, whereas a couple of weeks ago, India was reporting cases on a daily basis that were approaching up to 98,000, really heading towards the 100,000 new infections a day mark. Now, some experts are saying that perhaps there has been some reduced testing that's resulting in those lower numbers, but the government has said that it hasn't actually reduced testing. It's continuing to conduct high numbers of tests. But medical experts also warn that we may not have actually seen the peak in India, that people shouldn't get too optimistic about these numbers. And numbers of over 79,000 per day are still obviously incredibly high, and now India is going into its festive season. That could lead to a further rise in cases as people move about a lot more, travel, meet family and friends, and the country is continuing to open up. Just this week, the Indian government announced that cinemas would be allowed to reopen with 50% of their seating capacity, and that schools could also start to gradually reopen from the middle of this month. So that's a factor that could, of course, lead to a further rise in cases, and India could start to see those cases spike once again, doctors are saying.
Yeah. I mean, on the other side of it, Rebecca, it's been recorded that the recoveries have now also become fewer than the detection of new cases.
Yeah, so India does, according to the official figures, boast a very high recovery rate. Now it's at 83.8%. It's also got a very low fatality rate when compared to other countries at around 1.5%. But medical experts also warn that these numbers may not necessarily reveal the true picture of what's actually going on in the country, that in fact the number of infections could be far higher than those confirmed cases that we're seeing reported by the Ministry of Health on a daily basis. And that's because partly a lot of cases are going undetected, particularly earlier on in the pandemic. When it hit India, the testing was actually very, very low indeed, and still there are doctors are saying there are still a number of cases that are going undetected, particularly in rural areas and smaller towns, where it's much more difficult for people to even get access to testing facilities and so on. So that's a factor there. And also the fact that there may be deaths that are not being accurately recorded as well, and that could mean that these figures that we're seeing are not necessarily accurate when we look at the real numbers. The worrying thing as well is that the virus has spread from the major cities, and it's going into the rural and smaller towns of the country, smaller villages, where it can be very, very hard to keep track of what's going on in terms of administration and recording the actual figures. So that's another concern that's been raised.
Yeah. I mean, on the other side of it, Rebecca, we've got the phenomena that the sectors of the economy are continuing to open up at the back of the fact that, these cases, especially when it comes to recoveries, are not as high as anticipated, at the back of the actual worry around the reporting of some of these COVID-19 infections. Are we at all worried about the strain which the healthcare sector is actually having as a result of the sector of economy that continues to open at the back of these cases that, unfortunately, as much as they are on the decline, not enough?
This has certainly been controversial. The government's been in a very difficult position because once it introduced its very strict nationwide lockdown in March, that put a lot of people out of work. The lockdown was announced just hours before it came into effect. It was one of the strictest lockdowns in the world, and a lot of businesses closed, and a lot of them have yet to reopen. A lot of labourers left the big cities and fled to their villages, some of them walking hundreds of kilometres. It really had a devastating economic impact. Also, the figures that came out recently showed that in the April to June quarter, India's economy contracted by 23.9% on the year, which was an incredible drop in economic activity. So since then, over the past few months, the government has steadily been trying to reopen the economy in an effort to get people's livelihoods back and try to allow businesses to generate some revenue. So that's why it has continued, despite these high numbers of cases coming through, to allow facilities, to allow businesses to reopen. And that's what we've seen recently, just a few days ago. The government allowing cinemas to reopen, for example, this month. It is then up to the individual states to decide which of these relaxations they go ahead with. So the central government actually allowed restaurants to open in India a long time ago for dining customers, several months ago, but it's only on Monday that the state government of Maharashtra plans to actually allow this to go ahead and will allow restaurants to reopen once again for dine-in customers. So state governments are doing different things to try to control the spread of the virus in their respective regions. And Maharashtra, where Mumbai is located, is the worst affected state in the country.
Yeah. Rebecca, we'll leave it there for this evening. Thanks a lot for joining us. That's Rebecca Bundhun. They're giving us the latest, our ENC correspondent in India.